I think the identity is emerging, and nowadays a big battle is being fought to make sure the role of women is more equal. That is another, it's being done in such a forceful way with no other, my women friends in other parts of the world are astonished at some of the recent legislation concerning that. So we are, taking a country with a 2,000-year-old tradition of treating women not as well as we should have, and within a period of 1 year, accelerating it into the 21st century. So all of this is going on at this time. And we are, I think, seem to be quite content with all this. Occasionally we get mad, but, that's okay. Yeah.
Bye.
I want the producer of Delhi Belly and Dhobi Ghat, and Satyameva Jayate, to be answering that question.
I don't think there's any one definition of Indianness, which I'm sure everybody will agree with. We are too diverse a nation, and each and every one of us is a product of such different circumstances that we define it for ourselves. I think the fact that we belong in India and we are each of us different is, like Ajit said, just the definition of Indianness, that we just belong to this country full of different languages, different ideologies, different political points of view. I mean, as far as the youth go, I think I would say that the way for you to define yourself as an Indian would be to do things that you're interested in and comfortable doing from the space that you come from. I've struggled with it a lot in my own work, in that I find that I'm an urban animal. I have never grown up in a village. I've had, I think, one of the more entitled upbringings of, and most of us in this room I would consider entitled, because we live in big cities. We have such amenities as power and water at the turn of a tap and things like that. So I don't know the realities of so many other Indians, so that sometimes I question my own Indianness, if you want to put it like that. But I think wearing a 9-yard sari and, knowing Bharatnatyam is not necessarily doesn't necessarily make you more Indian. I think it's how you engage with other Indians, engage with the idea of India and the problems that we go through. Engaging politically with this country, I think, would be how Indian you are. We can be in a bubble of New York within India, or we could actually engage with the realities of other Indians. And I think that would be the critical thing that the youth need to do, is engage with all the other Indias. While they are comfortable being in their own India. I mean, you're comfortable driving a car on the streets of Bombay, and that's very valid. But we must know that there are people who, have none of the things that we have. So I would use, that to actually start whenever one questions how Indian we are, or how Indian I am, for instance. Thank you.
Depends on how inclusive and how empathetic you are.
Exactly, it's empathy.
Sir, go ahead.
Extending to what the earlier she asked, somehow I get a feeling that we are becoming a highly argumentative society. Whether you watch a TV program by Arnab or all the 600 channels and the newspaper. The second aspect is somehow I think we are putting too much of negativity in our media, newspaper. Because my sons who are based in US, whenever they come here, they say, Dad, why so much of things are reported negatively? When you open the newspaper, you find everything negative. Whereas abroad, I am told it is not so bad. So can we do something to bring some moderation, some change in the way we look at things and way we report? That is my question.
What was the first part of the question?
His question is, I'll paraphrase that a little bit. He's talking about this excessive negativity.
Yes,
and he talks about, you open the newspaper, argumentativeness. He named somebody who had known the name here. Okay. And then he said that why is it that we're so argumentative? Why so much of bad news? Let me modify that statement. Isn't the film industry also responsible for amplifying that bad news?
Absolutely.
Amplifying the bad news.
Yeah, bad news.
I thought our cinema is largely so escapist. How are we amplifying it? Unfortunately, we don't even really address what's going on in much of our country, in our cinema today. That's my big problem. So I don't feel we amplify it enough.
But isn't a lot that is happening in cinema getting to be mimicked? And there is if you go to interior India today, suddenly, violence is becoming mainstream, and violence is becoming very mature, and violence is becoming very heroic, if you will. So, is there an angle to it? Am I discovering a question, or would you think that? Okay.
So I would like to, I'll just address what Subroto said first. Subroto, I feel that, we went through a whole phase of extremely violent cinema in the 80s with, all the one man beating.
Violence.
Yes, yeah. And even the 90s actually, for some period with Sunny Deol and all the action heroes and one guy beating up many people. And usually it was always a fight of, a street guy beating up goons or a poor man beating up a villain, etc. So there was always, ideologically, it was always balanced the right way, but of course violence was always there. And I think violence continues to be there in cinema across the world. I'm not a great admirer or proponent of violent films. I would say our films are actually highly non-violent compared to, say, Korean films, or the films of other Southeast Asian countries, where it's extremely graphic and gruesome, and in fact many films in the West as well, even films made by well-known people such as the Coen brothers, they have very, very violent films. Now I think if you go into it a little bit and step away from the argument that films automatically influence behavior, I don't agree with that. I don't think films, it's not such a direct chain of influence or reaction. My feeling on that is that we need to think about why is, for instance, the news in our papers bad, and why is there violence in our films, and for instance, why do we have such bad TV serials? Why are they, when we actually introspect about that, I think we come back to the point that, especially when it comes to the newspapers, there are pretty bad things happening in our country. Violence is among the it's one of the things that we speak about the least, but it's there in almost every household, maybe not in certain elite entitled households where we don't have the struggle of every day getting our meals. But when I look at my own household and the women who work for me, they're all, without exception, victims and survivors of violence in their own homes. They are single women bringing up children in extremely violent conditions. They live in a society where, more often than not, they have no access to redressal, no access to security. So they have to actually comply with certain societal norms, otherwise they will not be given security by the state. So they are part, and they have to be complicit with certain social, requirements for them, that they have to be a certain way. And this is in big cities like Mumbai. So violence is part of everyday life. Unfortunately, or fortunately for us, we are, I think, insulated from it, being from a particular part of society. But to my mind, it's one of the things that's now being reported more and more, and therefore shocking us more and more, because I think, say 20, 25 years ago, reportage wasn't as much, and I think editors and people who were part of the media elite would not want so much violence to be reflected in the papers. So all I'd like to say is that, sir, it is a reality today. We read more every single day in the paper. We read about rape and people being killed and, hunger, starvation, and it is our reality. So I think for the first, we have to step up and accept it, despite the fact that it gives a very negative impression of India abroad. According to me, let's not think about what people think of us abroad. I think that's very secondary. They don't live here, and they can think what they like. It's important what we think about ourselves. What does it say about us as people that every day in the paper we wake up and read this? That a 16-year-old girl is gang raped. What does it say about us as a nation? And that needs to be reported. If it's not reported, you and I won't talk about it. And if you and I don't talk about it, there's a chance that it'll go unspoken for the next few generations. And I don't think we want that to happen.
Yeah, on that note, Ajit,
is there a need to... I want to add something to this question, because this has been preoccupying me for a while. So I did some research across all people I know in television and print. And one of the things that I am starting to believe is that journalists believe, Indian journalists believe that such stories sell. It's a very fundamental assumption. They tell this to me in confidence after the fourth drink. On television, it is believed that, particularly English language television, believes that such stories, particularly about corruption in high places, sells. I interviewed some of our own journalists in my own company, and they have similar views that some such stories apparently are welcomed by the middle class. And when I went on a hunt to see why should that be so, the underlying sociology looks something like this. The Indian middle class, which includes certainly all of us, and is going through an angst period today. Mm-hmm. And the angst arises because you open a newspaper on a particular day, Times of India or Hindustan Times, where you live. On the right side is ads for apartments which cost 4 crores and 5 crores. And on the left side of the same page are stories about 2G scam, coal scam. Mm-hmm. And the average middle-class person whose standard of life is eroding compared to his parents, how they lived, looks at this and says, I'm a hardworking person. How these apartments, how on earth can I even think of owning an apartment? I'm a journalist, for example, 5 crores and 4 crores. And I look to the left and see the corruption stories. I concatenate the two and say, people who can afford such things must be corrupt. Yep. And that is the angst today in India's middle class. I'm seeing it much more in Delhi when I go once a week. Yep. Much less in Bombay. In Bombay, we tend to think, there is a problem, maybe I need to work hard enough and make some money. In Delhi, they say government must be wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
Government must have something to do with this contradiction that I live. I think there is a middle-class angst in our country.
Well, no doubt. I don't know if it's just middle class, though, because if you look at the same story, which is very valid that you're talking about, gets published in every vernacular medium, and the